Last May, I tabled my first energy report with the Speaker of the Ontario Legislature. It contained nonpartisan, reliable facts about Ontario's energy supply, use, and conservation, focusing on the big picture. Overall, Ontario's energy use and conservation has not materially changed since last year, as I will show in a companion volume this summer. Today's report focuses on one part of that picture, the connection between water and energy. In particular, I report today on the energy used by Ontario's municipal water and wastewater systems and what can be done to reduce it. Most Ontarians take cheap, safe, ample water for granted. 85% of us, about 11.6 million people, have unlimited clean water delivered to our taps by municipal governments every day, and can flush unlimited wastewater away into municipal pipes. For us, drinking tap water is a good energy and climate choice, far better than bottled water. But Ontario's municipal water and wastewater systems have unnecessarily high energy demands, greenhouse gas emissions, and freshwater impacts. As we reported last year, for most municipal governments, water and wastewater systems are their largest energy uses, on average, almost 40%. As we suspected, these systems have enormous opportunities to reduce their energy footprint throughout the municipal water cycle, but many are not traditionally thought of as energy conservation. Some opportunities come from improving pump motors, others from reducing leaks and losses, as high as 30 to 40% in some municipalities, or from conserving and reusing water. Some opportunities come from better capital planning and spending, and others from harnessing the renewable energy in wastewater. And the combined benefits of these opportunities can be much greater than the impact of individual initiatives in isolation. To date, many municipal water systems are energy laggards. They leave money-saving energy efficiency opportunities on the table. We ask why. Inadequate funding, inadequate data, ineffective incentives all contribute. Much municipal water infrastructure was built long ago without taking energy into account. And a focus on short-term capital cost instead of total cost has long favored cheap initial construction at the price of high energy use and high greenhouse gas emissions. The good news is that all levels of government are now planning major investments in water infrastructure renewal. This gives Ontario municipalities a once-in-a-generation opportunity to cut the energy and environmental footprints of their water and wastewater systems, and in the long run, to save their residents money. The Ontario Clean Water Agency is ready, willing, and able to provide technical assistance, and municipalities tell us that they are enthusiastic about the opportunity. In this report, we look at how the provincial framework could help municipalities improve across the entire municipal water cycle. As always, you can't manage what you don't measure. So an easy first step is better, more automated energy reporting. Another easy step is to shift when municipal systems use electricity. This can save the municipalities money while helping the entire provincial electrical grid to run more cleanly and more cheaply. And we have to ask why the province is forcing some sewage treatment plants to multiply their energy use up to 5 times in order to achieve very small reductions in phosphorus, when cleaning up urban and agricultural runoff would reduce much more phosphorus at a much lower financial and energy cost. One key question that we examine in this report is, how can energy efficiency projects get a fair chance at funding? The key is to refocus infrastructure decisions on total life cycle cost and not just initial capital cost. And here we have at least the possibility of more good news. The province is about to set rules for municipal asset management plans. Those plans, if done well, could finally bring energy costs into infrastructure decisions and capital budgets. And for example, we know that the city of Barrie, when they started to consider energy costs in their decision matrix, they chose different projects. Asset management plans could also put water conservation first. Ontarians spend a lot of money and energy on water that gets wasted through leaks, low efficiency fixtures, unmetered water consumption, using treated water only once, excessive lawn watering, etc. And for example, the city of Guelph, by bringing in water conservation programs, which cost them about $9 million, they've avoided about $31 million in infrastructure spending and also reduced the strain on their water source. Energy and water efficiency is the right place to start. But wastewater systems can and should go much further. Many can become renewable energy centers that capture the hidden energy in sewage and put it to productive use. For example, biogas from sewage can offer renewable, low-carbon energy, replacing fossil fuels for heating, for electricity generation, and for transportation. And you'll see a picture of a bus in the executive summary. To create even more biogas, wastewater plants could process food-type wastes along with the sewage. This would also keep those food-type wastes out of landfills, where they release methane, a powerful greenhouse gas, and also contribute to leachate. Already, Ontario municipalities like London, Toronto, Simcoe County are looking at recovering the energy in sewage or other organic waste. Stratford is exploring co-digestion of sewage with food waste to create biogas, and Hamilton is already fueling some of its transit buses with biogas from human sewage. In my experience, municipal governments, both staff and councils, are committed to the public good and to continuous improvement. They know that energy and water are precious. Most are concerned about climate change, and they all want to save their taxpayers' money. So here we are. Ontario has a once-in-a-generation opportunity to cut the energy and environmental footprints of municipal water and wastewater systems. Let's not waste it. Merci à toutes et à tous. Any questions?
I'm just wondering, in terms of the energy from waste, do you have any idea of the costs of turning poop into power, so to speak?
Well, one thing we do know is that every plant is different. So as we showed a couple of times in the report, the costs for each plant vary dramatically. About 2 or 3 dozen Ontario wastewater plants already have anaerobic digestion, and they have it because it reduces their cost of managing the sewage sludge. But only about 9 of those are making combined heat and power out of the biogas. So we know that it can make financial sense. It isn't going to make financial sense everywhere. The best evidence we have internationally is that it makes financial sense for facilities that handle more than about 5,000 cubic meters of wastewater. And
Is that a day or a year?
a second, let me check that
Okay,
for you.
sorry.
I should. No, it's a big number, and I should know that. I may have to ask the staff who know. All right, but if we have some numbers in the back. If you look at the survey as to the size handled by, it's cubic meters a day, and if you look at page 138, we've got the survey responses, and roughly about 40% of the respondents told us that they handle more than 5,000 cubic meters a day. Municipalities that handle less than that, like St. Hyacinthe in Quebec, it still makes financial sense for them if they take in other waste, food waste and so on, because that way they get enough organics to get enough biogas to make it all make sense.
All right, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Where do those new plants fit into the overall context of existing sewage treatment plants? Will they supplement them or replace them over the long term? It sounds like it may be a whole new set of plants to be paid for.
I don't think so. St. Hyacinthe used its existing plant. Stratford is looking at using its existing plant. As I indicated, we have about 2 to 3 dozen plants that already have anaerobic digestion, but they're not allowed to accept food waste. They're only dealing with the sewage itself, and so in many cases, they don't really get enough biogas to really make the finances compelling. But we have the Waste Free Ontario strategy, where the province is calling, and quite rightly, for getting organic waste out of landfill. Well, if we're not going to put it in landfill, right now it makes about 30% of Ontario's waste, where is it going to go? We simply don't have enough alternative licensed places to handle that much organics. So it makes sense to look back at the sewage treatment plants and say, what can we do with what we have?
What are some of the best examples outside of Ontario or outside of Canada of wastewater plants as renewable energy centers on a scale comparable to Toronto?
Well, the ones that I have at my fingertips are Aarhus in Denmark and St. Hyacinthe in Quebec. I know there's a tremendous amount of work going on in California, but if you'd like additional examples, we would be so happy to provide them to you, and I have a team of experts over here who will look up the answers for you.
The recent federal document on the carbon
pricing.
Carbon pricing.
Yes.
It specifically stated that wastewater treatment facilities were not going to be governed by that fee.
Well, I think that's not how I read it.
No. Oh, perhaps.
Right. I thought what they said was that the wastewater plants would not be eligible for their cap and trade system, their intensity-based system,
Okay.
because they are not susceptible to carbon leakage. Your wastewater plant cannot move to the U.S.
Right. No. Yes.
At least not and continue to do the same function.
Right.
But in any event, the expectation, I believe, is that the federal system won't apply to Ontario. It's a backstop system, and since Ontario has a carbon pricing regime, the federal rules are
Sure.
relevant only as a comparison.
Yeah. So I wonder how this document can compare to what other provinces are doing, or is this a leadership opportunity for Ontario? How do you-
Well, we're not aware of anybody else who's really looked at water and wastewater in Canada. The International Energy Agency, in their annual report this year, did make a major focus on water and wastewater and their intersection, because they see it as having enormous implications around the world, that the energy footprint of water is rising and the water footprint of energy is rising, and both of those are going to be problematic as the population grows and the climate changes. So we think it's a real opportunity for Ontario to both move towards our climate targets, save money for residents, reduce the stress on our water, and as you saw from last year's drought, we now have to get serious about water shortages in ways that we never thought we were going to have. So it's an opportunity to do what we already know how to do and just do it better. Yes, sir.
Could you talk about the importance of full cost pricing mechanisms and eventually moving every municipality to full water metering as a way to, one, pay for infrastructure, two, regulate use?
Absolutely. Full cost pricing, as you know, Mr. Justice O'Connor clarified during the Walkerton inquiry how critically important it is if we want to have our water and wastewater systems operating. Well, he was talking about water in particular. If we want them to operate in good order, they have to be funded sustainably. And we still don't have that. So since Walkerton, which was 17 years ago, we've had 2 different statutes passed by the provincial government to allow the introduction of full cost mandatory pricing for water systems, and neither of them has been proclaimed. So we are still in the situation that not our water systems, not our wastewater systems, not our stormwater systems, none of them are sustainably financed. And so we're not paying the true cost of operating them in good order. And so if you look at page 59, you can see a schematic of what happens is, if you're penny wise and pound foolish, you can scrimp and put off maintenance for a while until the whole thing collapses, and then you have to build it again. And we certainly see some of that. So one of the opportunities that asset management planning offers is to compel councils to look at the true cost. Most Canadians, we pay in Ontario an extraordinarily low amount for water. We pay much less than it really costs to provide water. We pay less than most other provinces. We pay less than most people in the world. And we're not paying enough to keep our systems in good order, much less cope with population growth and climate change and the increasing stringency of standards that are coming our way. So if municipalities do add up their energy costs and put that in their capital planning and put that in front of council, council will know and be able to talk to the public about, well, we really value safe water. We really value not having people's basements flooded. We really value not polluting our drinking water with our waste. This is what it really costs to run them, and if we pretend otherwise, we don't do anybody any favors.
Just in getting back to your point about last year's drought, I was thinking about that when I read the part of the report about using gray water or partially treated wastewater for things that you don't need to use drinking water for. For example, maybe watering your lawn, even though I know you don't probably want me to water my lawn.
Well, but if you're going to do it.
Yeah. So
Right.
what I wanted to ask was, how can municipalities, since we now have a kind of like a one system delivery, we get all the water we get at our houses and our apartments is potable, drinkable. What are some ways around that where you could use gray water? Do people just need to devise this system in their own home, for example?
Well, you'll see that we did suggest, if you look at the list of recommendations, our recommendation for Chapter 5, which is about energy conservation, is we have suggested that the Ministry of Municipal Affairs should amend the building code to provide, expand opportunities for reuse of gray water and rainwater. And just so you think about how you might want to use that later when you design your plumbing. So that's one thing that they could easily do. They do already allow a certain amount of use of gray water. There are, there's so many opportunities. We look at even in the city of Calgary. So they're using treated wastewater effluent for cooling their power plant so that they're not using drinking water for that. I think about firefighting. I was in Quinte Conservation Authority last week, and they were telling me that last summer, all the emergency fire point water sources dried up. So they have a series of basically standby wells that they've put in around the Conservation Authority so that a fire department, a volunteer fire department, or a local fire department in an emergency can always get water, and they all dried up last summer. So he's now asking his municipalities to plan, well, what are you going to do if there's a fire? When there's a fire, in a hot season, in a drought, where are you going to get water? And so we need to be more creative in thinking about wastewater effluent might make perfect sense as a way to put out fires, especially if you don't have anything else. In San Francisco, they use gray water and treated effluent from sewage plants to water their golf courses. There's also a lot of work being done in parts of California about using gray water to flush toilets. So there's a lot of things that can be done. In Ontario, it will probably be for niche uses, but the example in Calgary of the power plant is a perfect one. They designed the power plant, they thought about it as they were building it. Where are we going to get, whatever it is, 14 million liters of water? They need an enormous amount of water. Where are we going to get it? Well, you can't take it all out of the Bow River. So they had to be more creative, and since they had to be creative, they said, you know what, there's a sewage treatment plant right over there. And we have hundreds of sewage plants in Ontario, so there's a lot of opportunities. And we did a special report on stormwater last fall. Okay. Yes, sir.
Talk a little bit more about asset management. I know there's different standards and levels of programs. Municipalities across Ontario, and especially rural municipalities, are behind. What mechanisms have you identified? To make sure all municipalities, small and large, have adequate asset management plans, and how important is it to this this program?
Well, I certainly recognize that it's harder for smaller municipalities who have less staff. But again, if you remember that we're at the point of a once-in-a-generation injection of billions of dollars into water and wastewater infrastructure, it would really be just terrible to waste that opportunity and not think about energy costs when we're choosing how to spend that money. So we've been recommending, and I recommended last year and I recommend again, the provincial government shouldn't give money for capital projects without requiring people to think first about energy and water conservation. Because otherwise you can spend, public money is precious and scarce, and spending it on things that you don't need to do, or the things that are going to cost more than they should because you've taken a short-term focus, it's just not a good use of public money. The degree of sophistication we would expect to be different for bigger municipalities or smaller municipalities. And I don't have any problem with the idea of a phased or tiered approach. But the basic principle is also true for small municipalities. In fact, in many ways, it's harder for the smaller municipalities to pay the operating costs than it is for the larger municipalities. And for water and wastewater, energy costs are a very large part of their operating costs, and those costs are going to rise. We know they have to rise. Electricity prices are rising, and with the nuclear plants looking for more money, that has to go up again. We know that treatment standards are rising. We know that climate change is making the water require more treatment and makes receiving waters less ability to absorb pollution. So the costs are going to go up. And for those small municipalities, how are they going to absorb those operating costs? So again, making capital decisions without thinking about operating costs is not good for them. Now, how they can do it, there's a lot of ways to simplify it using emission factors and shortcuts in models, model bylaws, model plans, package plans that they can copy. I'm not saying that everyone should have to do everything, in a bespoke fashion, but it just doesn't make sense to make these decisions without thinking what it's going to cost to run.
Could you talk about a governance structure? I know some stakeholders have talked about the need for an arm's length independent new body to manage things, including rates, to make sure that there are high standards across the provinces. Is that anything that you've given any thought to? I haven't read this.
We didn't think that was necessary. We didn't look at it in detail. As I said, we do think that a mandatory requirement of full cost pricing makes sense, and we've called for that for years, as did Mr. Justice O'Connor. But the first step is to give municipalities the information to make the decision. So this is why we call, first of all, for the province to collect relevant data in a useful fashion. I mean, the current method is not very useful. To collect only 2/3 of what's relevant, maybe half of what's relevant, and then take it a year and a half before you give it back with no improvement and put it out just on a spreadsheet with raw data. This is just not useful, especially since the US EPA already has this system, a portfolio manager for all the US water and wastewater plants, and their problems are very similar to ours. So there is a really good way of collecting the data. We should do that. Then we should use the data in planning how we spend billions of dollars. And then we should be thinking ahead to, well, how do we make the best use of the energy that's here? And, this doesn't seem like rocket science.
Could I ask then, I noticed that the recommendations don't specifically get into data management, like information technology and the Internet of Things and that kind of stuff. Are those recommendations we can expect in, say, phase 2 of Every Drop Counts?
Oh, well, I never like to scoop myself on my own reports. I mean, the thing about Portfolio Manager is that it does two things. It accepts the data electronically, so you don't have transcription errors and you don't have to wait 3 months for somebody to type stuff out. And then it gives you an instant response. So for a municipality who needs to make a decision, it is really not helpful to say, okay, in a couple of years, we'll get you your data in a very user-unfriendly method with no benchmarking. Why is this helpful? Let's use the tool that's there. They're already using it for private buildings. Why not use it for the broader public sector? And, I might say, for government buildings themselves.
So I know that there are certain stakeholders that I've spoken to that might say that simply reducing the energy or carbon footprint might not go far enough, and we need to be looking at infrastructure that actively remediates. How would you respond to that?
Well, there's lots of things that, in a perfect world, I'd love to do. But we should start with what we are doing. Right? The federal government has said they're going to spend $9 billion in phase 2. A lot of that's going to go to water and wastewater. You have to, on a population basis, Ontario would be getting about $3 billion of that. There'll be some matching money from the provincial government. I mean, I don't know how much. If it's the same ratio as phase 1, then you'd assume it's another $1.5 billion. Okay, that's $4.5 billion. Then you need matching fundings for the municipalities. So, we just keep going back to the basics. Figure out what you're doing. Put energy and water conservation first, because that's often the same as energy, right? The cheapest things are the things you don't have to build. operate it better, only use what we need, and then what can we do better? And this chance to move towards renewable energy is important because we have this Climate Act. We know why we have to reduce our emissions, but it's going to be really, really difficult. Closing the coal plants was hard, and it was the easiest part. So how are we going to get to an 80% reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions while increasing the population 50% while the climate changes? And if we ignore the opportunities to use what we have, I mean, energy in sewage is fairly easy to get at. We already know how to digest it to make methane. We already know what to do with methane. We can use all kinds of things with methane, including run buses with it, whether we paint it on the sides of the bus what we're doing or not. I hope you all saw the picture, right? Okay. I really like that picture. So it doesn't require fancy new technology. I mean, fancy new technology would be great. We've seen enormous improvements in the efficiency of solar and wind over the last 10 years. We've seen a lot of improvements in energy efficiency. It would be perfectly reasonable to say, all right, if we get serious about anaerobic digestion and biogas use, we'll see enormous improvements in the efficiency, and that will reduce the cost and make the opportunities greater. And it's just time to get at it. We've got the Ontario Energy Board, as you know, setting up their framework that they're working on right now for renewable natural gas, and that will help provide the market. And so all these pieces have to be thought about, the approvals piece, the market piece, but also if we design all the systems first, the old way, we'll have just locked ourselves out of an important opportunity for a long time. You know, these sewage plants, they last for many decades.
I know in any of the documents that I've read, water reuse tends to have a bit of a public relations problem, especially historically in the case of Walkerton, as you mentioned. I know that California also is doing a really good job of water reuse strategies. Yes. Would you care to comment on how we might approach that in Ontario?
Well, there's nothing like a drought to change people's points of view. The survey that we saw suggested that about 3/4 of Californians now feel water should be reused, whether there's a drought or not. I mean, they now have a really visceral understanding of how important water is, and most Ontarians don't yet. But the people whose firefighting wells went dry last summer, they've got a better understanding of it. The people whose personal wells went dry last summer, the farmers whose crops withered last summer, people are starting to get a sense of, you know what, we need to be more careful with this. So when you have that awareness, people's attitude changes pretty quickly. They don't necessarily want to be drinking treated wastewater directly, although I did, when I was in California, I was taken to a development where they are being required to reuse all their own black water on site in the development. Okay, great, good for them, and I expect the technology will continue to improve. Of course, they have to do it on the space station too. But I think we sell Ontarians short, right? If we don't tell them what it really costs, we don't tell them what the choices are, we just keep telling them that everything's fine, then they won't have to learn whether a different approach is possible. But you know, if we do allow a certain amount of grey water and rainwater use in the building code, but we haven't built much that way. One thing I did notice, though, is that if you think about low-impact development, where there is on-site rainwater management, instead of just sending it somewhere else, you keep it on-site. What we've heard from the builders is that actually benefits them two ways. They don't have to give up land for the big ponds that clog up, so they have more buildable space, and they can sell their homes for more because people like having the rain gardens and the water features and so on scattered around. So, you know, at first they thought, yeah, I don't know. And then they thought, oh, you know, this is actually pretty cool. So I think we will, if we give people the chance, we give them the data, let them see somebody that they know doing well with it, people learn. People are smart. And I think we all understand that water is precious.
The data about leakage across the province, a town like Kingston has 40% leakage. It's been proven, and Toronto's not that bad. Could you talk about the need to combat leakage, which is obviously better infrastructure and more spending on infrastructures, especially replacing the older stuff first, but in the context of the priorities that you see, you know, in terms of the system in Ontario?
Well, leak reduction is a really easy set of wins. One of the things that was interesting to me was that, if you have a 20% water loss rate, your energy consumption goes up by 30 to 80% more than that, because you have to pump so much harder to keep the pressure up past the leaks, and then when you're pumping so much harder, you're driving your pumps harder, so they wear out faster, and then your upstream pipes are at higher pressure and they leak more. So you can quickly go down a negative feedback cycle. City Kawartha Lakes has done a really good set of a really good example. They operate, I think, 21 small water systems around the municipality, and what they realized is they had a leak problem, but they didn't know where. So they put on a whole series of basically area meters so that they could get accurate figures as to what areas were using most energy, and then they looked for the ones with the highest water use and investigated in there. Then they've been able to cut their leaks a lot. Wawa's another good example. I mean, Wawa's 2,000 people? And they looked at, okay, well, how does our water use compare to the provincial average? Well, it was 3 times as much as the provincial average. Now, at that point, you don't have to know exactly where your leaks are. You know you have an issue. And Wawa, to their credit, recognized that they want to conserve energy, and as part of their community energy conservation plan, they need to conserve water. And so they have actively engaged their citizens in, okay, well, how do we do this better? How do we reduce our leaks and our losses and treat the water with more respect? So that seems to me to be a really good way of engaging citizens. Give them the truth, tell them what we know, and then look for the problem in cooperation with everybody else, and proper metering is part of it. And then there's all sorts of new fun techie things. So there's a ball you can flush down your pipes that will tell you where the leaks are. There's all kinds of fancy big data analysis opportunities. So it's easier and easier to get the data to find the leaks, and if you stop the leaks, you save a lot of money. I mean, why pour money into a hole in the ground? Even in homes, on average, once the water gets into the home, we still have an average of 13% leaks. You save money if you don't throw it away. And we've got the same thing on the other end, right? Infiltration into the sewage plants, same story, same basic, 15 to 30% best guesses of water infiltrating. That's extra water you have to pump. That's extra water you have to treat. The treatment of the wastewater is the most energy intensive part of our system. So again, if you get serious about leaks, reduce them. Sometimes you do have to redo a whole piece of pipe or reline it, and sometimes you just fix a hole. Well, thank you very much for coming. Thank you for your interest. Enjoy the report.